Sunja-ri had executed men for far less than betrayal. So when he found out that the woman kneeling on his marble floor, rag in hand, eyes down, uniform pressed to perfection, was actually the spy sent to bring his entire world crashing down, he should have pulled the trigger. He didn't. But would that one moment of mercy cost him everything he had ever built? Or would it give him everything he never knew he needed? The Ri mansion in Gangnam didn't breathe like other buildings. It exhaled. Slowly. Deliberately. The way powerful men do when they have long stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. 37 rooms. 14 staff members. 4 rotating security shifts. And every evening, at precisely 10:47, when the chandeliers dimmed to half their glow and the last council member's car disappeared through the gate, a black woman named Jolene Galloway knelt alone in the grand hallway and pressed a damp cloth to floors that had no business being that clean. She had been there 9 months. 9 months of learning how this house breathed. Which floorboards gave away footsteps. Which hallways swallowed sound whole. Which silences meant danger, and which ones just meant the night was doing what nights do. 9 months of invisible work. Of existing just enough to be seen doing her job, and not enough to be remembered doing anything else. Her uniform was navy blue with a white apron. Simple. Neat. Collar buttoned all the way to the throat. Her hair pulled back tight. Her hands moving in slow, practiced circles, the rag damp but never dripping, her knees settling into the familiar cold of the marble without complaint. She didn't look up when the study door opened. She already knew who it was. She always knew. At the far end of the hallway, Sunja stood in the doorway. Tall. Completely still. The kind of man who looks like discipline itself took human form. His black suit was cut so precisely it didn't just say wealth. It said control. Hands clasped behind his back. Jaw set. Eyes moving through the space the way a general looks at land he already owns. He had run Seoul's underworld for 11 years. He had never once lost a power struggle. He had never, not one single time, been caught off guard. And yet, he was watching her. Not the way men usually watch women. This was something quieter than that. Something more careful. Like a chess player staring at a piece on the board that isn't moving the way it's supposed to. His staff always trembled around him, not in obvious shaking, but in the small ways. The held breath when he walked into a room. The movements that became just a little more careful, a little more deliberate, as if his presence added invisible weight to the air. Jolene Galloway moved exactly the same whether he was in the room or not. That was the first thing that stopped him. The second was her eyes. Or rather, the way she controlled them. She never looked at him. And it wasn't fear. He had decided that weeks ago. Fearful people steal glances. They check and recheck. She simply didn't look. As if he wasn't a threat she needed to calculate. As if she had already run the numbers and chosen stillness as her answer. Sunja had built his empire on reading people. On knowing within minutes whether someone was loyal, corruptible, or dangerous. He couldn't figure out which one she was. And that bothered him far more than he would ever admit out loud. He unclasped his hands and disappeared back into the study. The door clicked shut behind him. Jolene exhaled, just barely, just enough, and her hand kept moving in steady circles across the floor. But underneath her apron, pressed flat against her ribs, a slim transmission device was recording everything. She had 3 weeks left on her assignment. She told herself she felt nothing. She was already getting very good at lying. Before we continue, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And drop a comment right now telling us what city you're watching from. It truly means a lot seeing this community grow all around the world. Every single subscriber helps us keep these stories coming and reach more people who feel every word, together. The Ri mansion had its own language. And you either learned it, or you left. There was no in between. The senior staff had been there long enough to speak it without thinking. They knew the particular silence that meant Sunja was in the East Wing. They felt the shift in the security rotation that told them a council meeting was coming. They understood the way the kitchen went very quiet and very efficient the moment his footsteps moved anywhere near it. 14 people kept this house running. Not one of them had ever been asked to stay. They stayed because leaving felt more dangerous than remaining, and remaining, if you were careful enough, was survivable. Jolene Galloway had understood all of this within her very first week. She was the newest member of the cleaning staff. Placed through a legitimate agency. References spotless. Background as clean as the floors she polished. She had arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning in September. 1 bag, 2 uniforms, and a cover story so carefully built that even she sometimes forgot which parts of it were real. The housekeeper, Mrs. O, had shown her the servant quarters with no warmth and no cruelty either. Just the clipped efficiency of a woman who had long since stopped expecting new staff to last very long. She said, "The main hallway gets cleaned last. Never before 11. Never when Mr. Rhee is in his study with the door open. You will not be told this twice." Jolene had nodded and said nothing more than she needed to. That, too, was part of who she was pretending to be. She learned the house the way her training had taught her to learn everything, from the outside in. Exits first, then rooms. Camera positions before furniture layouts. The Rhee mansion had 4 blind spots in its entire surveillance grid. She had found all of them by her 3rd day. By her 4th, she had already started using them. What she hadn't expected. What no file, no briefing, no amount of preparation had warned her about, was Sunja himself. She had read everything on him. 41 years old. Rose to lead the reorganization at 30, after his predecessor died under circumstances nobody asked too many questions about. No confirmed kills on record, but a body count that lived in the silence between Seoul's crime reports. Brilliant. Ruthless. Emotionally sealed shut. The kind of man who made decisions the way a surgeon makes incisions, clean, certain, no hesitation and no visible feeling. The file had said nothing about the way he moved through his own home. He didn't move like a man who owned things. He moved like a man owned by his own discipline. Every step measured. Every pause chosen deliberately, as though he had decided in advance exactly where he would stand and for precisely how long. There was no wandering in him. No restless moments. Even when he was still, it felt like a decision. Not a rest. Jolene noticed this the way she noticed everything. Quietly. From the corner of her vision. Filing it away. He noticed her on the 11th day. She knew the exact moment, because his footsteps changed. Not by much. Just a fraction of a beat. The kind of pause a man makes when something catches his attention and he doesn't bother hiding it, because he's never had a reason to. He was passing through the east corridor on his way to the courtyard, and she was on her knees at the far end, working at a scuff in the baseboard that had been bothering her for 3 days straight. He stopped. Not for long. 4 seconds. Maybe 5. Then he kept walking. Jolene kept working. Her hand didn't falter. Her breathing didn't change. But something had shifted in the house around her. She felt it the way you feel a change in the weather before the sky shows you anything. A quiet drop in pressure. A new kind of attention settling over her like a second uniform she had never agreed to wear. She was exceptional at her job. That was never accidental. Her cover demanded it. A careless maid draws questions, an outstanding one draws only quiet approval. But underneath the strategy, Jolene had always been the kind of person who did things all the way or didn't do them at all. She polished the marble until it doubled the chandeliers in its surface. She pressed the household linens like she had something to prove. She noticed which areas needed attention before anyone asked, and addressed them without comment, without needing acknowledgement. The other staff noticed. Some were relieved. Some had the particular tightness that comes when someone else's excellence makes your own comfort feel like a flaw. Sunja's head of security, a broad, quiet man named Director Wu, who said very little and missed absolutely nothing, watched her work one morning from the far end of the corridor. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was its own kind of approval. But what no one could see was what happened in that narrow 40-minute window every night, between 11:15 and 11:55, when the household fell to its lowest, quietest point. Kitchen staff done and gone. Security rotation out on its outer sweep. Corridor cameras moving through their predictable cycles. That's when Jolene would slip to the third-floor linen closet. The smallest of the mansion's 4 blind spots. She would lift the cleaning solution bottle from her cart, unscrew the false bottom, and pull out a transmission module no bigger than her thumb. She would log everything she had gathered that day, access codes she had quietly memorized, names spoken on phone calls she wasn't supposed to understand, patterns in when council members arrived and when they left. Then she would send it all in a compressed burst that lasted less than 8 seconds. Module back in the bottle. Cart straightened. Back to work. Her handler's voice, the last time they had spoken directly, had been calm and clinical. "You're doing well. 3 more weeks and we'll have everything we need." A pause. Then, "Don't get comfortable." She hadn't said anything back to that last part. There were moments. She was honest enough with herself to count them, even if she couldn't explain them, when something about this house got under her skin in a way that had nothing to do with the mission. One night, passing the study, she heard Sunja on the phone. Voice low, controlled, sharp as always. He was talking about a shipment. She filed the details without thinking. But then there was a pause, and when he spoke again, something in his voice had shifted. Not softer exactly, but less armored somehow. And she heard him say, "My father would have handled this differently. My father handled everything differently." Another pause. And then, quietly, "That's not a compliment to either of us." She stood still in the hallway a moment longer than she should have. Then she moved on. She didn't log that part. The background check results came back on a Wednesday. Sunja was at his desk when Director Wu placed a folder in front of him. Wu had a gift for delivering information with his face completely blank. It was the quality Sunja valued most in him. But there was something in the way he set that folder down, deliberately, carefully, that made Sunja look up before he even reached for it. "Routine?" he asked. "Started routine," Wu said. "Became something else." Sunja opened the folder. The placement agency checked out. He confirmed that himself in under 2 minutes. The references held at first pass. Jolene Galloway's work history existed, 3 domestic positions over 7 years, employers reachable, their descriptions of her consistent with everything she showed in his house. But the apartment listed on her application, a small place in Mapo, had only been rented for the first time 4 months before she applied for this position. That alone meant little. Except the deposit had been paid in cash. And when the building manager was quietly contacted, he confirmed that was unusual enough for him to still remember it. Her most recent employer, a family in Yongsan, remembered her clearly, spoke well of her, gave a description that matched exactly. But when Director Wu's contact asked which agency had placed her there, the name they gave was different from the agency on her application. Small enough to be a clerical error. Small enough that most people would never notice it. Sunja read the folder twice. Then he set it down and looked at the ceiling in that particular way he had, not searching for something, just arranging what was already there. Finding where each piece fit. "Nothing confirmed," Wu said. "Nothing needs to be confirmed yet." Sunja closed the folder. Either she's a thorough woman with ordinary paperwork mistakes. Or she's thorough for a very different reason. How do you want to handle it? Sunja thought about 11 days of watching her. About the way she moved through his house, too disciplined for it to be nothing, not obvious enough to be careless. About the fact that she had never once, not a single time, glanced at him with any trace of curiosity. And curiosity, in his experience, was the one thing almost no one could fully suppress. Add cameras on the 3rd floor. Don't touch her schedule. Don't change a single thing. He picked up his pen. Let her believe the house is still asleep. The first test was small. A set of financial documents, real ones, from a deal that had closed 3 years prior, nothing sensitive left in them, laid out at the edge of his desk during the window when Jolene cleaned the study. Not messily. Precisely messily. The way a man who trusts his entire household might carelessly leave papers out. Sunja watched the study's interior camera from a screen in the east wing. She cleaned around the desk. Her eyes moved to the documents exactly once. A glance barely 2 seconds long, the kind you give something you've caught in your peripheral vision without meaning to. She didn't slow down. She didn't shift her angle to read them. She moved to the window and kept cleaning. Sunja leaned back in his chair. Either she was disciplined enough to ignore obvious bait, or she was exactly who she claimed to be. He was already fairly sure it was the first one. The second test told him more. He placed a young, deliberately casual security staff member in the kitchen during Jolan's morning break, with one simple instruction. Be friendly. Make conversation. And mention that a spare set of keys to the East Wing storage room was kept above the service door frame. Just in case she ever needed to know. Jolan had smiled politely and said she'd keep that in mind. She never went anywhere near that door. But 3 days later, Director Wu found a small patch of adhesive residue on the door frame, exactly where the keys were supposedly kept. No keys had ever been there. The whole story had been invented. But something had been stuck to that frame recently. Something the right size and weight to be a listening device. She hadn't ignored the information. She had passed it along. Sunja sat with that for a long time. There was a particular feeling he recognized. From years of running the reorganization. The feeling that arrives when a situation stops being difficult and becomes genuinely complicated. Difficult was something you managed. Complicated had variables that couldn't be fully controlled. He hadn't felt it in a long time. And he didn't enjoy it. But he respected it, the same way you respect a current in the water that could carry you forward or pull you under, depending entirely on how carefully you moved. He gave no further instructions. He just watched. She came across him in the garden just past midnight. She had finished the evening transmission, put the module away, returned the cart to its station. She was taking the long route back to the staff quarters, a habit she had built deliberately to check the outer corridor cameras as she went, when she turned the corner of the east wing and found the garden gate standing open. And Sunja standing inside it. No phone. Nothing in his hands. Nothing he was reviewing. He was simply standing in the dark, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking out at the city lights glowing orange and white above the wall. His posture was the same as always. Straight. Deliberate. But without the jacket, without that armor of formality he wore everywhere, something was different. Something that took her just a moment too long to put a name to. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that a night's sleep fixes. The kind that settles into a person after years of carrying something heavy, so long that the weight no longer feels like a weight. It just feels like them. She should have turned around quietly. She had actually taken 2 steps backward when he spoke, without turning to look at her. The roses need water. She went still. Mrs. O handles the garden schedule, she said carefully. I know. She's been handling it for 8 years. He still hadn't turned around. My mother planted those roses. Before she died, she made me promise to keep them. I've never once watered them myself. A pause. I don't know why I'm telling you that. Jolan stood very still. Part of her was still running calculations, whether this was another test, whether the tiredness on his face was something real or something performed, whether she should say something safe and leave, or whether leaving right now would itself look like something. The trained part of her mind was doing exactly what it had been built to do. But underneath all of that, quieter than she wanted it to be, something else was happening. She looked at the roses climbing the east wall. Dark and bunched together, their edges pale in the moonlight. She looked at the man standing in front of them, this precise, controlled man who ran Seoul's underworld with absolute authority and couldn't bring himself to water his own mother's garden. And she thought about that phone call she hadn't logged. About the way loneliness has a posture all its own that money and power never fully correct. I can add them to the morning schedule, she said. He turned then. Just slightly, just enough to look at her over his shoulder. His face in the low light was unreadable in all the ways it usually was. Except for one thing. His eyes held something she hadn't seen there before. Not surveillance. Not strategy. Just attention. The kind that actually sees a person, rather than a calculation. That's not what I meant, he said. I know, she said. He turned back to the city lights. She stood there one moment longer than she needed to. One moment she knew she could never account for in any debrief. Then she turned and walked back toward the staff quarters, her steps quiet on the stone path, the cool night air against her face. Below her apron, the transmission module was silent. Some things, she had already decided, she would carry alone. The confirmation came on a Friday. Director Wu set a second folder on Sunja's desk, thicker than the first, heavier in a way that had nothing to do with how many pages were in it. Sunja finished the sentence he was reading, capped his pen, and opened the folder with the same unhurried deliberateness he brought to everything. The transmission intercept report was 3 pages long. Technical analysis from a signals team Sunja kept quietly on retainer, men whose entire job was to monitor the frequency bands around the mansion the way a doctor monitors a heartbeat. Steady for months. Routine. Unremarkable. Until it wasn't. 8-second burst transmissions. Encrypted and compressed. Originating from inside the mansion's perimeter. 3rd floor. Irregular in timing, but patterned. Always between 11:15 and 11:55. Always on nights when the security rotation was completing its outer sweep. Whoever was sending them knew this house's rhythms precisely. The origin had been traced to within 6 feet. The 3rd floor linen closet. No camera in that room. One of 4 surveillance blind spots in the entire mansion. All 4 of which had been located within her first week of employment. He had watched her find them. He hadn't stopped her. He had wanted to see what she would do with them. Now he knew. Sunja closed the folder. He sat very still, hands flat on the desk. His expression held the particular calm his counsel had learned over the years to read with great care. Not the calm of a man deciding. The calm of a man who had already decided. And was simply giving the world a few more seconds before everything changed. Does the council know? He asked. Councilman Beck requested a briefing, Director Wu said. Before I had filed the report. Sunja was quiet for a moment. Beck requested it. Not Park. Not Shin. Beck. Wu said nothing. He understood exactly what Sunja was noting. Call a full council session. Tomorrow evening. Tell them there's a security matter that requires everyone present. Sunja stood and straightened his jacket. And tell Mrs. O that Jolin's schedule stays exactly the same. They came for her at 9 o'clock. 2 of Sunja's men appeared at the staff quarters door carrying the kind of posture that doesn't need to say anything. Straight-backed. Hands visible. Faces showing nothing that might give her a moment to prepare. Jolin set down the linen she was folding. She didn't ask why. She didn't reach for anything. She just walked with them. Sunja watched her come through the council chamber door from his position at the head of the table. A woman with nothing to hide would have asked questions the whole way here. A woman caught off guard would have been showing fear by now. Jolin Galloway walked into that room the way people walk towards something they have already decided to face, chin up, shoulders back, hands loose at her sides. The council chamber was a long room. Dark paneling. A table that seated 12. 7 council members already seated along its length. These were not men who were used to being called in for security matters. The air held the particular tension of powerful men who had been made to wait without being told what for. Sunja looked at her for a long moment. She looked straight back at him, not performing innocence, not pushing back with defiance. Just a steady, direct gaze that made more than one man at that table shift in his chair. Your name, Sunja said, is not Jolin Galloway. The room went very still. Your name is Donna Kersey. You are an intelligence operative. You were placed in this household 9 months ago with one specific task, to gather enough intelligence to dismantle the reorganization and hand it over to the people who sent you. He paused. Those people being a rival syndicate, working together with certain officials who stand to gain a great deal from this organization no longer existing. Donna Kersey. She felt her real name come back to her like something she had set down a long time ago and nearly forgotten what it weighed. She held his gaze. Didn't move. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it either. Councilman Beck was the first to speak, and he spoke with the urgency of a man who had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment. The protocol couldn't be clearer. She is an enemy operative on our property. This is not a conversation. He looked down the table, pulling nods along as he went. We handle this tonight. Here. And we make sure whoever put her here receives the message. 3 council members agreed without hesitation. A fourth, more slowly. Councilman Park said nothing at all. Which, in council language, was its own kind of yes. Sunja hadn't moved. You've been transmitting for 9 months, he said to Donna, as though Beck had said nothing at all. You mapped this house. This organization. The patterns of every person in it. He paused. What did you find? Nobody at that table had been expecting that question. Donna looked at him. Something shifted in her face, not softening, but loosening. The way someone looks when they have been holding a very specific tension for a very long time and have finally decided that holding it serves no purpose worth serving anymore. I found exactly what I was sent to find, she said. Her voice didn't waver. The organization's operations. Financial structures. Council names. Shipping routes. She kept her eyes on his. Everything I needed to do what I was sent here to do. Then why, Sunja said quietly, didn't you do it? The room forgot to breathe. Donna was quiet long enough that Beck started to open his mouth again. And Sunja raised one hand, barely, just slightly, without even looking at him, and Beck closed his mouth and didn't try again. Because I was sent to destroy a monster, Donna said. And somewhere between the first week and the 9th month, I stopped being certain that's what I was looking at. No one said a word. Sunja reached inside his jacket. The gun was matte black. Familiar in his hand the way something becomes familiar when you have carried it for years without ever finding pleasure in it. He held it at his side for a moment. The council didn't move, these were men who had been around guns their whole lives. But the quality of stillness in that room changed the way it always does when a weapon arrives and makes everything that was abstract suddenly, completely real. Sunja raised it. Donna did not step back. She did not close her eyes. She stood exactly the same way she had stood from the moment she walked through that door, straight, grounded, with the quiet composure of someone who had made their peace with what might come and refused to make it look smaller than it was by flinching. Sunja looked at her for one long moment. He thought about 11 days of watching her work before she had any idea he was watching. He thought about the garden and the roses and the specific quality of her silence when he had said something honest into the dark, and she had stayed instead of retreating. He thought about a phone call she had overheard, a shipment, details she would have transmitted, and the fact that his contacts had found no trace of that intelligence ever being used. He thought about Councilman Beck, who had requested a security briefing before Director Wu had even filed the paperwork. Who had known this moment was coming before Sunja had called the meeting to make it happen. He turned the gun. One shot. Clean. Beck was gone before the sound finished crossing the room. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Not the silence of held breath. The silence of men recalculating everything they thought they understood about what was happening in this room. Sunja lowered the gun. He looked at what remained of his counsel with the same unhurried calm he'd worn all evening. Beck placed her, he said. Simply. Plainly. Not on behalf of any outside syndicate. On behalf of himself. He needed a case, a documented, verifiable case. That would justify removing me and putting someone in my place who would be more useful to his private arrangements. He needed her to be an outsider so the intelligence trail wouldn't lead back to him. He needed just enough instability to make a move look justified. He paused. What he didn't account for was that she stopped sending him anything useful 6 weeks ago. Or that I would notice both things at the same time. Councilman Park said, very quietly, how long have you known? Long enough. Sunja set the gun on the table. The matter before this council right now is not what to do about her. It's what to do about whoever else in this room knew what Beck was building. He looked slowly down the table. I'll give you until morning to think about how you want to answer that. 3 council members handed in their resignations before the sun came up. 2 of them didn't get the chance. The mansion was quieter after that. Not the tense kind of quiet. The other kind, the kind that settles in after a storm has passed through and taken with it everything that was already unstable. The staff returned to their routines. The security structure was rebuilt from scratch. The empty council seat stayed empty for a week while Sunja made his decisions slowly and carefully, the way a man makes decisions when he has finally learned that choices made in the immediate wake of violence are almost never the right ones. Donna stayed. That was not something anyone could have assumed. In the hours right after the council chamber, after the room had been quietly and efficiently dealt with the way the household dealt with difficult things, she had stood in the east corridor with her hands free and no particular direction to go. Her mission was over. Her cover was finished. The transmission module had been removed from its hiding spot so completely and precisely that she understood with quiet certainty that Sunja had known exactly where it was for some time. She could have walked out. The gate wasn't locked against her. She wasn't being held. She was standing at the east corridor window, watching the garden, the roses against the wall in the early morning light, pale and unhurried, when she heard his footsteps coming down the hall. And she didn't move away from the window. Sunja stopped beside her. Not close. Just the right distance for 2 people who haven't yet decided what the right distance is. You stopped transmitting 6 weeks ago, he said. Yes. And everything you gathered before that, it was never used. No. Why? She thought about the question the same way she had answered him in the council chamber. With the honesty of someone who has decided that the performance is simply no longer worth what it costs. Because using it would have meant destroying something I was no longer certain deserved to be destroyed, she said. And because by month 4 I already understood that the people who sent me were not cleaner than the people they sent me against. I kept transmitting anyway, because that was my assignment. She paused. And because somewhere in the middle of all of it, I made the mistake of seeing you as a person instead of a target. I'm a professional, Mr. Ree. I didn't come to terms with that easily. He was quiet for a moment. Sunja, he said. She looked at him. If we're past the part where you're my maid and I'm your target, he said, you can use my name. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but in the same neighborhood. Donna, she said. My name is Donna. I know. He looked toward the roses. I've known for a while. They stood in the morning light without speaking. Which was, Donna thought, its own kind of honesty, the kind that 2 people arrive at when words have been weapons and tools and cover stories for long enough that silence finally becomes the most truthful thing left. I'm not the same organization I was 9 months ago, Sunja said eventually. 3 council members gone. 2 operations on hold. Beck's arrangements are woven deep into the financial structure, pulling them out will take months. He paused. I'm also not interested in being what I was 9 months ago. Donna looked at him. What does that mean? It means I have been running something I inherited and never once examined, he said. My father built this. I kept it going. I told myself that keeping something alive was the same as leading it. He met her eyes. You were sent here to take it apart. I've spent the last few days considering whether that instinct, even arriving the way it did, through the wrong people, for the wrong reasons, was entirely wrong. You're not going to tear it down yourself, she said. Not as a challenge. Just as a fact. No. But I am going to reshape it. He looked back toward the garden. And that requires someone who understands what it is and what it could become. Someone who has seen it from both sides. Someone who is still standing here. The morning light moved across the roses. Somewhere deeper in the mansion, the kitchen was beginning to stir, the familiar sound of a large household pulling itself back into the rhythm of a new day. Donna looked at him. This precise, controlled, more complicated than any file could ever capture man. Who had raised a gun in front of his entire council and turned it somewhere that surprised everyone in the room, including, she was fairly certain, himself. Who had stood in his own garden past midnight looking at roses he had promised his mother he would keep, and had never, in 11 years of running one of the most feared organizations in Seoul, once picked up a watering can. She thought about what she was now. Not an operative, that ended the moment she stopped transmitting. Not a maid. Not someone else's instrument or someone else's cover story. Just a woman standing on ground she had chosen to stay on. I'm not an operative anymore, she said. Whatever I was when I came through that gate, it ended in that room. I know. And I'm not a maid. I know that too. So what exactly are you asking me? Sunja turned from the window. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in that garden weeks ago, not calculating, not surveilling. Just present. The look of a man who sees something clearly and doesn't turn away from what he finds. I'm asking you to stay, he said. Not undercover. Not with an agenda. Not in service of anything except what you choose to build. A pause. Beside me. As an equal. On terms that you set. Donna held his gaze for a long moment. She thought about everything that was true all at once, that this man was not simple, that what he ran was not clean, that whatever came next would be complicated in ways no briefing could ever prepare her for. She thought about the fact that she had walked into this house as someone else's instrument. And was standing here now, at the end of all of it, as nobody's instrument at all. For the first time in a long time, that felt like the most solid ground she'd stood on. I set the terms, she said. You set the terms. And if something about how this organization operates needs to change, we talk about it. He held her gaze. As equals. The city beyond the wall was wide awake now. The roses along the east wall caught the early light along their pale edges, unhurried, quietly tended. On a schedule Donna had slipped into the morning routine 3 weeks ago, without being asked and without making anything of it. She nodded once. Not a performance. Not a calculation. Just a choice, made on ground she had claimed for herself, in a city she had arrived in as a stranger, standing next to a man who had seen everything she was, the operative, the deceiver, the one sent to dismantle him, and had chosen her anyway. Sunja had spent his entire life building an empire on control. But what he turned toward that morning, in the garden his mother had planted and he had finally, after 11 long years, decided to tend. That was not something he had engineered. It had simply arrived. And he had been wise enough, for once in his life, to let it stay. If this story moved you, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. It means everything seeing this community grow all around the world. Every subscriber helps us keep these stories alive, and reach more people who feel every single word. Together.